The year is 1944. As November drew to a close, the war in Europe, for most Allies, felt decided. Allied forces were positioned on the German borders, morale was high, and the greatest concern was simply making it home for Christmas. Allied High Command, lulled into a dangerous sense of security, believed the Wehrmacht was exhausted and incapable of mounting any significant offensive. A long, quiet stretch of the front line, spanning the dense, icy forests of the Ardennes, was designated as a ghost front. Only weary veterans were sent there for rest, and fresh troops were assigned for light patrols. But the winter of 1944 brought no rest, it brought hell. On December 16, 1944, just before dawn, that silence was shattered. An estimated 200,000 German soldiers, 1,000 tanks, and what remained of the Third Reich's fury launched a massive, desperate strike. This was Adolf Hitler's last great gamble, codenamed Operation Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, designed to split the Allied forces and force a negotiated peace. The objective was fast and brutal: smash through the lightly held Ardennes, seize the vital port of Antwerp, and cut the Allied supply lines in two. The sudden German attack tore a bulge, 50 miles deep into the American lines. The chaos was immediate and absolute. Roads became choked with streams of fleeing refugees and retreating soldiers. The hope for a swift victory evaporated amidst the fog, the bitter cold, and the overwhelming advance of German armor, including the feared Tiger II tanks. This was the terrifying prelude to the largest and deadliest battle the U.S. Army would fight in World War II in the European theater. The Allied forces were caught completely off guard, believing the only winter weapon the Germans possessed was a defensive line. At the heart of this chaos was an otherwise unremarkable road junction that was about to become the epicenter of the struggle: Bastogne. Bastogne was a vital hub connecting 7 major roads. Whoever controlled Bastogne controlled the movement of troops and supplies across the entire Ardennes region. Germany desperately needed this crossroad to refuel their armored divisions and sustain their drive toward Antwerp. On December 18, an emergency order was issued: the 101st Airborne Division, the famous Screaming Eagles, and the 82nd Airborne, were rushed to the area. They were pulled from rest and refitting after previous bloody battles in the Netherlands. They were thrown into the battle with no time to properly re-equip, and most arrived without the necessary winter gear. They wore thin autumn uniforms and carried minimal rations. When the paratroopers arrived in Bastogne, the town was already nearly surrounded. The low clouds and dense fog, which had been a blessing to the German offensive by grounding the Allied Air Force, now trapped the 101st. No air cover meant no resupply, no reinforcements, and no evacuation for the wounded. The fate of the entire Allied line seemed to rest on the shoulders of these isolated, poorly equipped paratroopers. Within days, the 101st and elements of the 10th Armored Division, Task Force B, were completely encircled. The enemy was not just in front, the enemy was in every direction. The fight was not just against the German army, it was against the relentless fog, against starvation, and, above all, against the cold, which proved to be an enemy as unforgiving as the Wehrmacht. The hastily established perimeter measured approximately 10 miles, but defending it required every soldier to be constantly vigilant against attacks from all sides. To truly grasp the ordeal of Bastogne, we must look at the individual soldier and the relentless physical agony he endured. Imagine the experience of a sergeant like Vance Lott, or any of his comrades deep in the frozen woods. They were not fighting in luxury, they had only the dirt and the ice of their foxhole. The snow fell relentlessly, covering everything and turning the deep forests into a silent, white tomb. The ground was so thoroughly frozen that blasting holes with demolition explosives, rather than digging, was the only way to build a proper fighting position. But even the foxhole offered no comfort. The cold was a constant physical torture, seeping into wet boots and thin clothing. Frostbite casualties soon outnumbered those from bullet wounds, becoming a silent, insidious epidemic. Thousands of soldiers would later lose toes, fingers, or even limbs to the crippling cold. Men had to constantly massage their feet or risk them turning black and dying inside their boots. The deprivation was profound. Ammunition, severely limited and rationed. Every single shot fired was a calculation of necessity. The paratroopers were ordered to conserve ammo, using only single shots where machine guns would normally be deployed. Food, rations were scarce. Soldiers were often forced to subsist on a single small biscuit or chocolate bar per day. Scavenging became a critical survival skill. Many soldiers resorted to eating snow to stay hydrated, further lowering their core body temperature. Medicine, the wounded piled up in makeshift aid stations and underground cellars, often without proper anesthetics or basic bandaging supplies. The constant flow of wounded pushed the exhausted medics to the brink of collapse, often having to triage with just a flashlight and freezing water. Communication, wire lines were constantly cut by German artillery fire, forcing officers and runners to brave the open fields under heavy fire to deliver crucial orders. This reliance on human messengers slowed response times and amplified the sense of isolation. The enemy was not only the German soldier, it was the psychological terror of being alone, encircled, and realizing that any movement outside the foxhole could lead to freezing to death or meeting an enemy patrol head-on. The German strategy was simple: crush the perimeter quickly. They launched multiple, coordinated infantry and armor attacks, probing for any weakness in the thin American lines. The Americans were scattered, fighting in isolated pockets, often without radio communication. The combat was brutal, close-quarters fighting. German troops often infiltrated under the cover of the thick pine forests and the heavy snowfall. There was no clear front line, every tree line, every road bend, became a desperate firing point. The paratroopers had to fight hand-to-hand with fixed bayonets to prevent German infantry from bypassing their lines. The psychological impact of the German panzers was immense. The American 57mm anti-tank guns were virtually useless against the heavy armor of the German Panther and Tiger tanks. The paratroopers were forced to rely on bazookas and the sheer courage of small anti-tank teams who had to hold their nerve until the tanks were almost on top of them before firing. It was a battle won by small bands of men refusing to yield a single yard of frozen ground, often having to sacrifice themselves to disable a single German tank. Adding to the horror of the siege were the German tactics of infiltration and deception. German commandos, known as the Skorzeny Brigade, fluent in English and dressed in American uniforms, infiltrated Allied lines to sow confusion, change road signs, and commit sabotage. This forced Americans to establish complex challenges and passwords, the "who's on first" moment of the war, creating widespread paranoia and mistrust among Allied soldiers. Most chillingly, this period saw horrific war crimes. In the town of Malmedy, on December 17, German troops from the 1st SS Panzer Division captured nearly 84 American prisoners of war. After disarming them, the SS soldiers machine-gunned them down in a field in cold blood. This massacre fueled the resolve of the American defenders. The word Malmedy spread quickly, reinforcing the belief that surrender was not an option, and fighting to the last man was the only guarantee of survival. On December 22, the situation reached its most critical point. The 101st was exhausted, low on critical supplies, and hundreds of men were wounded. It was at this moment the German command made its desperate play. Under a white flag of truce, 4 German officers from a panzer task force approached the American lines. They delivered a formal, written note addressed to the American forces commander in Bastogne. The message, delivered from General Heinrich von Luttwitz, was arrogant and chilling. The German command demanded the immediate surrender of the encircled town. They threatened the annihilation of the American forces by German artillery and air power if the surrender was refused. It was a proposition that seemed logically sound. The Americans were outnumbered, encircled, and without hope of immediate relief. The note stressed the hopelessness of the American position and demanded a reply within 2 hours. The acting commander in Bastogne was Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe. When he read the note, his reaction was one of bewilderment. After conferring with his officers, he struggled to find a response equal to the German insolence. Colonel Harry Kinnard, his operations officer, suggested the one-word answer, a slang term common among paratroopers. Finally, McAuliffe penned the most famous reply in the entire war, nuts. This single word, which can be roughly translated as nonsense, go to hell, or, in a more defiant military tone, kiss my ass, was the perfect symbol of the 101st's challenging resilience. The reply was not merely a slight, it was a declaration of intentions. It instantly electrified the American troops, raising the morale in Bastogne from desperation to total defiance. The German emissaries, baffled by the strange American word, had to ask for clarification. They were told the message was a definite, resounding negative. The entire incident became a powerful piece of American folklore, transforming a desperate defensive stand into a symbol of unbreakable will. The siege continued for 4 more brutal days. The cold kept killing, and ammunition stocks dwindled to dangerous levels. But McAuliffe's refusal had galvanized the fighting spirit, and fate finally began to turn. On December 23, the weather broke. The thick fog, which had been the Germans' greatest ally, lifted. In a roaring sound of hope, the Allied Air Force finally arrived. Hundreds of C-47 cargo planes flew over Bastogne in a massive resupply effort, dropping critically needed supplies, ammunition, plasma, medical supplies, and desperately needed winter blankets. The sight and sound of the planes and the cascading parachutes boosted the morale of the defenders immeasurably. The airlifts not only delivered supplies but also flew out many of the most severely wounded, giving the defenders hope. The resupply was immediately followed by a deadly bombing campaign by Allied fighter bombers against the German armored columns surrounding the city, turning the tables on the German offensive. Finally, on December 26, the siege was broken. General George S. Patton, to the south, had rapidly advanced his 4th Armored Division hundreds of miles in record time through the worst winter weather. The tanks of the 4th Armored, led by exhausted and grimy soldiers, punched through the German lines to link up with the 101st, bringing the relief that had seemed impossible. The Battle of the Bulge would not fully end until late January 1945. It was a costly victory, resulting in over 80,000 American casualties, including 19,000 dead, making it the costliest battle in U.S. Army history. The Germans lost over 100,000 men and vast amounts of irreplaceable tanks and equipment. The Battle of the Bulge was decided not by superior tank production or overwhelming air power alone, but by the sheer force of will of soldiers like those trapped in Bastogne. They were encircled, freezing, starving, and facing a numerically superior enemy who was capable of committing atrocities. Yet, by defending that single road junction and by issuing one defiant word of rejection to a surrender ultimatum, they consumed Hitler's last reserves. The strategic impact was immense. By committing its remaining operational reserves to the west, Germany significantly weakened its eastern front, directly contributing to the rapid Soviet advances that followed. The ultimate goal of the operation, to stop the Allied offensive, was achieved only temporarily, but the cost was the final destruction of the German military's ability to wage a two-front war. The legacy of the Battle of the Bulge is not just a lesson in strategy, but a powerful testament to the human capacity for perseverance in the face of total adversity. The determination of the 101st Airborne Division in Bastogne echoes today as one of the most powerful examples that, even in the most desperate conditions, the will of a small group of determined men can change the course of history. They didn't just hold the line, they defended it with the only word that mattered: nuts.